Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Um, Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ryan Keller. I'm the executive director with West Central Indiana Economic Development District. This is the first of hopefully many webinars that we're going to produce out. The title of this webinar series is called Emerging Stronger, and it is a webinar series that's designed to help our communities thrive. So we're going to be exploring a variety of different topics over the next several years, and they're all going to be focused towards things that help communities really rise to the top, and what should we be doing in the West Central Indiana region to start competing at a not only at a state level, but as a larger regional and a national level here to bring prosperity to our region. Today's webinar series is going to focus on digital inclusion. And what does that really mean? So if we're going to have digitally inclusive communities in the West Central Indiana region, what does that look like? And how do we start to build on this broader topic throughout the region and work in a positive and a forward direction? So on today's webinar, I would like to introduce two of our presenters. And that is Dr. Roberto Gallardo. He's the director of the Purdue Center for Regional Development. Roberto is he holds a electronics engineering undergraduate degree, a master's degree in economic development, and a PhD in public policy and administration. He has worked with rural communities over the past 16 years, conducting local and regional community economic development, and including the use of technology for development. He's authored more than 90 articles and reports, including peer-reviewed and news-related, regarding rural trends, socioeconomic analysis, industrial clusters, the digital divide, and leveraging broadband applications for community and economic development. He is also author of the book Responsive Countryside, The Digital Age in Rural Communities, which highlights a 21st century community development model that helps rural communities transition to, plan for, and prosper in the digital age. Dr. Gallardo is a TEDx speaker, and his work has been featured in Wired Magazine, MIC.com documentary, and RFD TV documentary, and he lives in West Lafayette with his wife and two daughters. Next is Scott Rudd, the director of the Indiana Broadband Office. So the Indiana Broadband Office was created by Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch, and Scott serves as the first broadband director for the state. The mission of the Indiana Broadband Office is to assist residents and businesses in need of affordable and reliable broadband connectivity. Prior to joining the Lieutenant Governor's cabinet, Scott operated as the town manager and economic development director for the town of Nashville in Indiana. He founded the Brown County Broadband Task Force to help steer the county's broadband strategy and secure several million in private broadband investments to expand access in the difficult to serve area. Scott also works closely with the Indiana State Department of Agriculture to work with farmers and farm businesses within the community on ways to make sure they are keeping up with the advancing technology that will keep the agriculture industry thriving. He also works closely with the Indiana Office of Community and Rural Affairs to collaborate with communities and identify the best ways to attract reliable, affordable, and high-speed internet to rural Indiana. Scott understands the importance and the impact broadband access has on the quality of life for Hoosiers who are able to access it. And he also understands that rural broadband can provide opportunities for healthcare, employment, and help others continue their education and offer more effective and timely communication. He holds a degree in public affairs from Indiana University and resides in Brown County. And I will be your moderator. Like I said before, I am Ryan Keller. I'm the executive director for West Central, and I am here just to be an active participant in leading this discussion and hopefully diving into all sorts of engaging topics. We will begin our presentation with Dr. Gallardo, and he has put together some fascinating slides for us. And I'm going to kick us off with the first question. What does a digitally inclusive community look like? And why is that at all important to all community stakeholders?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So thank you so much for that introduction, Ryan. I need to make sure I shorten my bio. It's always a little bit lengthy. I'm delighted to be here. It's a pleasure to virtually meet all of you. I have some slides here to kind of set the stage, and Scott and I will then discuss in depth with Ryan moderating. But again, thank you for this opportunity. Bear with me. From a public policy perspective, I've learned that we've got to agree on what the problem is and kind of define it before we can kind of jump into meaningful discussions and strategy. So that's why I'm going to provide you an overview of why digital inclusion is important for regional economic development. And then we can continue the conversation. Ryan, I won't be able to monitor the chat box, but if there are any questions, obviously, put them in the chat, and I'll be happy to address them. Let's get started with the baby internet. Here's the baby internet 50 years ago. Look where it is now. And I always ask communities, where will it be in 50 years, and what will your community do to leverage the whatever changing landscape? Right now, we know it's impacting. Amazon did a study about the rural business digital potential and how it's not being unleashed. They found that almost 360,000 jobs would be added to rural communities in the next 3 years if that digital potential is unleashed. There are multiple factors to unleashing it. I'm going to cover those later. The digital economy continues to grow. It's a moving target. The Bureau of Economic Analysis continues to update, fine-tune that metric, but it's now 9% of the U.S. economy. That's almost $2 trillion. How much of those monies are going to the West Central region or your community, really is the question you've got to ask. We know now with extensive research that broadband makes a lot of difference in a lot of fronts, including telehealth and firm attraction and job productivity. I mean, you name it. It's really everywhere at this point. However, we also find through research that adoption is more important than simple availability, and that kind of focuses again back into the digital inclusion concept. Here, let me share with you. We also did a study for every dollar invested, on average, you get $4 back in rural broadband. So it is worth it. The two main drivers of that is healthcare and adult education. And that is a very key component of digital inclusion, is adult education as well. I know kids and the homework app are important, but adults are also play a significant role, especially with upskilling, as I'm going to share shortly with you. Here quickly, that's 120 footprint. I know the 25-3 definition from the feds is the one to go, but there are multiple states that are already shooting for 120. So if we want to remain competitive, I just wanted to share with you kind of the footprint of that. Areas in white do not have advertised 120. Here we flipped and we show the density of homes, housing units outside of that footprint. So those are kind of the deserts. And I know I always like to pressure my friend Scott, to up that limit from whatever it is to 120. So that's some data from FCC to kind of set the stage. And as Scott will know, farmers are struggling to keep up with technology use. They may purchase bells and whistles and the state-of-the-art technology, and then it requires connectivity, and then they're back to square zero. This is a study that was done by the United Soybean Board, and again, it kind of shows. We also developed a digital divide index to help frame. I'm not going to go into a lot of details. Darker areas have larger digital divide measured in multiple ways. We also developed a vulnerability. So areas in dark here as well show areas that are not able to implement COVID mitigation strategies such as e-learning or remote work, or poor connectivity, one, but also their share of occupations and industries are not remote work friendly. So these are all kind of important conversations to keep in mind. We have these tools for you. And let me just hammer this. Mobile is not the solution. I get a lot that, oh, my smartphone will be sufficient. It can get really expensive, and there are data plans attached to that. If you have teenagers, you will know you will blow through those data plans quick. So mobile is not the solution, okay? And I'm not saying that you think it is. I just want to make it clear that it is it complements it is one of the tools to solve the digital divide. And Scott will go into more in depth in this, but infrastructure barriers that I've seen in my work, and Scott may agree, lack of leadership at the local level, lack of expertise, and lack of density, really, ROI is what really affects. And Scott has really great analogies he's going to share with you moving forward on the infrastructure front. Right-of-ways, easements, topography, it is a complicated problem. But here's the wrench or the wrinkle I want to add. It's not all about infrastructure. So let's shift gears and talk about digital inclusion, and I'm going to loop it back to regional economic development shortly. Digital inclusion refers to the adoption of broadband technologies and its meaningful use for social and economic benefits, okay? It's broader. Infrastructure is one piece, but it's not the only piece. Why is digital inclusion important? Well, because everybody wants their community to be, I'm going to skip through that quickly, but how can you make sure that you have a healthy, vibrant, resilient, and empowered region or community? You use 7 capitals. We are adding digital capital right there at the lower left. To the right, you see an example of how a very simple trail can leverage these capitals. The point is, if today you are missing digital capital, then you're not going to have a healthy, vibrant, resilient, and empowered community. It's as simple as that. Why? Because digital capital is really not only skills and competencies to use the technology, but also in addition to devices and connectivity, digital capital allows you to convert online benefits into offline benefits, right? Like jobs and who's using the internet and how they're benefiting and why, did you get a job, a promotion, a healthcare, you save money. That is really the key that kind of pulls everything together from this regional economic development perspective. So let me share with you here. This is the DDI profile for Indiana, but focus on the graph to the right. You see there that top graph shows the percent of homes making $75,000 or more with no internet access. The black bar is Indiana, 7.1%, and then the dark green bar is rural areas of Indiana, 13.6% of homes making that money do not have internet access. But look what happens to the next category, homes less than 35,000 with no internet, right? It's 40.8% in Indiana, 47.3% in rural areas. This is an issue, folks. If we are to remain competitive and move forward as a state, we have got to take care of these inequalities. And the state is taking phenomenal steps in this regard. Scott is one of those. It's a tremendous resource. The next level funding is another great resource. So we are working on this, but it is still here. It is, and in your region, you have not got to overlook that because the homework gap we know is huge. COVID kind of shed a light on that big time. And this is a slide that many people do not really are aware of. Middle skill jobs make 46% of all jobs in the US. They don't require a bachelor's degree. However, 82% of these jobs require digital skills. So if you do not have adequate connectivity, or if you do not have a digital inclusive framework or mindset, these middle skill jobs are not going to be within reach of your workers, right? Because you cannot learn digital skills if you do not have a digital inclusive mindset. So here's another great one from the National Skills Coalition. I'd like to point out the younger workers are not immune to digital skill gaps. Many people assume younger folks, they're okay. Not necessarily. About 8% of 16 to 24-year-olds have no digital skills in 2016. And of course, as you get older, that number increases. But the point is, you have got to be inclusive, both young and old, if you are to have a digital inclusive region and you are to compete in this, digital age times. Here is websites per 100 residents as an indirect measure. Look for your county. We have an interactive map online if you want to take a look at it, but this one shows a high density of ventures, what GoDaddy calls ventures. It's websites per 100 residents. It's correlated with higher income, more economic, and and that makes sense. Moms and pops have a presence online. Of course, we now know about telework, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that. It's huge, remote work. The trend was there, and it just got accelerated times 1,000. So if you are not digital inclusive, now remember, digital inclusive is a little bit more than infrastructure only. It's the whole ecosystem. You will not be able to thrive or leverage remote work strategies for your communities. Okay. How can you be a remote work friendly community or region? There are 4 areas that research identifies. Offer incentives to existing businesses to hire teleworkers from within your region or outside the region or outside the state. This way you can ensure that the business does not leave because it cannot find the workers it needs. Also, you may incentivize at the state level, businesses to hire Hoosiers, but they're not necessarily physically located in Indiana. That's another possibility. We have got to upgrade our workforce development to include digital skills and so forth. And of course, broadband availability and affordability is huge as well. If you kind of focus on these 4 areas, you will take steps towards making your region more digital inclusive and competitive in this 21st century. So what are the community implications? We're wrapping up here. Industrial age assumptions no longer hold. Look inward, right? Diversify. Do not continue to only bet on industry in the sense of manufacturing and so forth. Do not replace it, but augment it with looking inward with moms and pops and digital skills and remote work. There's multiple strategies. Make sure digital inclusion is a priority in your community. We're going to share more resources in other webinars, is my understanding, and we're here to help. Scott is here to help. I'm here to help. Placemaking is huge. Younger folks enjoy a lot of the placemaking issues, so it's kind of more of an ecosystem approach. Another one you want to do is telework friendly policies, which I just discussed. Repurpose workforce development, folks. That needs to change to incorporate continuous learning. Soft skills are critical. Remote work skills are critical. Not anybody can remote work, okay? There are some basic skills there that are needed, and obviously digital skills. And this one I like a lot. Make your community more responsive and engaging in a digital format, right? Don't make residents get in line for something that can be done online. You're not going to earn brownie points from the younger generation if you do that, right? So all these are kind of examples of this digital inclusive mindset for your region, and obviously we have to improve leadership, incorporate youth. If you can do that through digital platforms, I think it's a lot more interesting to them. But at the end of the day, and then I'm going to switch it over to my colleague, Scott, you have to answer that question. I think that from a regional economic development and quality of life perspective, this question, if you are able to answer it, I think you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of many, many other communities and regions. So Ryan, I sped up there a little bit, but I just want to make sure we have time for a pretty cool discussion.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Roberto. I really appreciate that. That really gave us a very quick lay of the land and really what being digitally inclusive looks like, and also provide a lot of useful data for us. I think it was a clear indicator from a lot of your maps that our area is definitely struggling in this digital inclusiveness, and that it is a real problem, and that it's a problem that we don't want to just turn a blind eye to and think it's going to work itself out on its own. We have to actively engage it and start coming together as a region in all of our communities to start having these conversations.
Yes, sir.
Scott, if you want to unmute yourself, I'll ask you the same question. Really, what does this digitally inclusiveness mean to you and through the state of Indiana and what you're working on? And why do you think it's important, to all the different community stakeholders?
Sure. Well, thank you, Ryan. And let's see if I can go ahead and share my screen here.
While we're having Scott share his screen, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, please type something in the chat box, and I'll be happy to unmute you so you can ask your question.
All right. Well, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Ryan, I appreciate you hosting this call today. My name is Scott Rudd. I'm Director of Broadband Opportunities for the Lieutenant Governor. Back in 18, this position was created, and I was the first person to enter the space. And I can tell you, it has been an exhilarating 2 years in this position, and focusing on broadband in a time when we all know it's never been more important or more urgent. So thank you for hosting this. Digital inclusion is one of those things that I learned the hard way in my prior role, is something that is really instrumental to even attracting investment in broadband. And the way I was thinking about it, my prior role in Brown County in the town of Nashville was really primarily focused on the deployment side, and we were laser focused on that because we had a really tall mountain to climb to accomplish that. And so I think it took us 2 to maybe 3 years to finally feel like we had secured investments across the county that would kind of meet our needs. And it was at the very end of that, after we thought we were finally there, that one of the providers pointed out to us that they were concerned because we had a 52% free and reduced lunch population, and that could prevent those folks from being able to access the technology and adopt it after that. And so it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing in my mind in some ways, but I think you've got to do both at the same time. You've got to really attract youth.
Scott, I think your fear has happened, Scott. If you can hear me, you have lost audio. I'll share with you, Scott. Scott shared with us that he has a computer that does not like Zoom, and that randomly it will shut his audio off, and so he'll have to turn it back on and off in order to get it to work. So we were hoping, fingers crossed, that wasn't going to happen for Scott, but it looks like it has. And Scott, we are still not able to hear you. So he may hop off and hop right back on. Roberto, while Scott's correcting those technical difficulties there, feel free to insert any sort of IU jokes that you would like, since you are coming from Purdue. We would like to go ahead and kick it over to you.
Can you hear me yet, Ryan?
Oh, you're back. All right.
I'm back. I just saved Roberto. Great. Redeemed myself. Sorry, folks. I'm not going to share my screen until I get to a certain page that I think I really want you to see. So I guess my point is, each of these activities, when we're thinking about attracting investment, we're thinking about creating a digitally inclusive community. They're not isolated from each other. In fact, they are mutually beneficial to each other. And so, in other words, the more interest and the more subscribers that your community can really convey to a potential investor. And I see folks on the call who are providers, and Josh Cerner from Joints on the call. I see they know that if folks don't adopt and become digitally included in our economy, then their return on any future investment will be less. And so there are certain thresholds they like to see, and it directly correlates to an investment, right? If they can see 60% of your community is digitally included or interested in adopting a service and utilizing it, that's a very attractive number versus the map that Roberto showed me that was so revealing to me, and it said a lot, I think, about what you're dealing with, is the websites per 100 residents. I thought that was a fascinating slide, Roberto, and it didn't show a lot of activity in your region, which I think is an indication that, to Roberto's point, some of the small mom and pop shops are maybe not as digitally included as they could be. I'm going to try to get back to my slides here. one of the things that communities can do to really engage on this issue, and I'll risk sharing my screen here, um, is to basically create a leadership group that can tackle this issue and the other investment issues kind of simultaneously throughout your community, so that you basically have a better fighting chance of moving forward quicker, and with all of the above, right? The digital inclusiveness and the investment that you need. What you see hopefully on the screen here is a map that shows some of the areas of activity across the state. And I will tell you, there's a whole lot more that we're not seeing here in terms of activity. Regions are standing up leadership groups all across the state. And so the Northeast, the Southeast, the Southwest, and even up in, your region. Now you are starting to talk on a more regional basis, and have quite, for some time. I recognize several of the folks on the call, Bill Dorey and Larry Moss and Kristen Craig and Cindy Todd and John Ford, not strangers to this conversation. It's been happening. And so I'm really glad and thankful for Ryan to pull this group together. The groups that you see on the map that are highlighted have, formed these leadership groups for a variety of purposes. I do see some activity in your area. In those groups, I will go to the next slide, where you see some activity tend to have, a better, chance of securing funding. On the left, you'll see the Next Level Connections grant map. The blue areas are eligible areas, and the orange dots are investments that occurred through the Next Level Connections grant. And so, I think there's some RMC and joint activity through the area, as well as I'm forgetting one over in this area, but the group on the call knows. And so what you see on this is the Next Level Connections grant on the left, and the blue again is eligibility, and that's based on a 10-1 speed threshold. So in other words, if you don't have 10-1 speed, then you're not then you're highlighted here as an eligible entity area for the grant. On the right hand side, you'll see a lot more shaded areas, and this is the upcoming FCC Rural Digital Opportunity Fund auction that's going to happen here in 7 days. And there are some big winners in terms of eligibility. When you go from the left side of this map to the right side, it's improved dramatically. And the reason for that is, particularly when I looked at Clay County, this southern part of Clay County, and unfortunately it kind of got off the bottom of my map here, I think, but this is lit up. And where you see no eligibility here, on the right hand side, the FCC map, you see incredible eligibility. And as well as all through up here, Park County and other areas, you see a lot more eligibility. The reason for that is on the right hand side, the FCC is now for the first time using a speed threshold of 25.3 speed, which has been the minimum broadband speed as determined by the FCC for a few years now. But they've changed, and now when deploying funds, they're using 25.3 as the threshold versus the 10.1 speed, and you can see what happens when that occurs. If the state program would select 25.3, the map would look much like this, versus on the left where there's less eligibility. So important point there, I think. And again, to combine these two issues, I'm going to stop sharing here. So when you combine these two issues, again, I think you have to think of them together, right? Because one is complementing the other. And so I just want to make that an important point, because I don't want you to end up like I did, thinking about investment first or thinking about digital inclusion first, and then realizing, a part of that conversation wasn't addressed. And so I'm happy to ask kind of more detailed answer any more detailed questions you may have. I want to kind of leave some time for some dialogue here, Ryan. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
I appreciate that. Looking at that last slide that you had up with the light blue map versus the different shades of pinks, to me, that's that's shocking, really. Especially if I'm looking at the light blue maps, to think that we still have quite a few areas within our West Central region that don't even have access to 10-1. That's shocking, to say the least. And but then even as I look over into what the FCC is doing with you said 25.3, I think, are the speeds. Uh, do we see that the state of Indiana is going to adjust their map to coincide more with something that's 25.3? I can speak from experience. My parents they're small business owners, and they use like a 10-1 connection, and it is frustrating, to say the least. Most of the time, my parents end up coming over to my home, where we have a much higher internet connection, just to do their day-to-day business operations. So I can see where that's a real issue for folks who are wanting to have a small business within these rural communities. So should we look for the state to adjust their threshold and say, really, 10-1 just doesn't even cut it in today's digital world? Do we need to move our baseline requirement up?
Yeah, I'm sure Roberto might want to comment on this also, but rewinding back to the kind of when this conversation occurred at the state level. So it was a couple of years ago when the program was formed, and at the time we looked at the FCC model, and they were using 10-1 when they deployed, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in funding. They were using that as their threshold. And so my understanding is that was the intent of that, is to follow that example. And now that example has changed, right? And so the question is, should we adapt our state policy? And you've seen the results of what that would do for your region. And I would encourage you to advocate for what you think would be beneficial to your region. And clearly more eligibility would do that, would open up funding channels. Happy to hear any other input on that.
Yeah, so I'm curious if really we shouldn't even be, and I see that Bill Dorey just in the same thing I'm getting ready to hit on, that to even 25.3 doesn't cut it. Kudos to you, Bill. We're right on the same page that the minimum really should be, 150. That's what it's going to take. And if this is a really complex issue and it's not an easily solved problem and it takes years to do this, then we should be planning ahead and say, well, what is going to be that minimum requirement in 3 years, or 5 years down the road, that we need to strive for today? So when we finally do get these feats accomplished, we're right on track where we need to be.
I think Bill might have beat Roberto to that comment on speed as well. But yeah, I mean, I want to tell you something I think you need to know, and it's not the most fun news, but if the entire region were fully funded to deploy fiber to every home today, right? Somebody dropped off a check. It would take years to build that out to every home, right? We've got to keep that in mind. And so, the more we can do to expedite or shorten that process and unlock the capability of being digitally included, I think that's really where the work. I'd love to see you focus on that. How do we quicken that pace, right? Shorten that timeline, because quite frankly, when I look at these maps and I look forward at the next 2 years, we have funding cycle after funding cycle after funding cycle for these areas in your region. The timing of your community's engagement right now could not be any better. In fact, rewinding 3 years ago, it was a financial desert, right? The state didn't have money. The feds didn't have money for this. Now everybody has money and they're pouring it on. And so we are going to see phase after phase after phase in this upcoming, 2 to 3 year period that I do not want your region to miss out on. And it's imperative that you engage now as quickly as you can, because the longer you wait, the more cycles you're going to miss, right? And that money gets sucked back up and then redistributed. And you know, I do not want us to lose, quite frankly, one day, if we could avoid it, of a lack of connectivity for Hoosiers. And so, you know, the timing could not be better. I talk a lot about investment, you know, but there are also significant opportunities for digital inclusion, you know, funding to be captured from private and corporate foundations, endowments, you know, your business community, you know, and others. And Roberto has a wealth of resource and information available on that topic as well.
Oh, that's a great answer. Thank you so much, Scott. Really appreciate that. You know, and that's, you know, that's where I'm starting to think is this. So this is such a, you know, a complex problem. It really is the chicken or the egg. So we have multiple problems going on all at once, and looking at this from that holistic point of view, it can be at times a little bit overwhelming of just where to start. So, you know, Roberto and Scott, where do you advise communities and or large regions like ourselves, if we're wanting to really start gathering a rock solid team together to start having these conversations and looking at it from, you know, from the educational side, from the healthcare side, from the telework side, from the attracting, you know, new businesses through economic development to the community development side, putting all these pieces out on the table and saying, all right, how do we start to create this plan? What's your advice? And, you know, and what do you recommend that we start to do?
Let me jump in there. Well, get a group together that at the county level, and then perhaps you could create a kind of regional effort as well. But broadband is very local, okay? It boils down to local solutions, really local movement. So get a county level task force in place that can you know, take this on and really be the ones that are beating the drum in regards to infrastructure, broadband infrastructure. I have seen, again, communities that do not make it to that step. They don't gel a group together, and so they have these isolated efforts going on, and it does require, as you just described, Ryan, all hands on deck. And so start with a task force at the county level. Identify areas either through the FCC data or cross-check the FCC data with word of mouth, like where your parents live, where you know the neighborhoods are struggling. Identify those areas and then start seeing, okay, where can we go for money to get this, you know, to get these areas built? So first and foremost, get a group together, a passionate group together that is the one kind of in charge that moves this forward. Otherwise, it will fizzle. You will be pulled in a gazillion directions, and nothing will be done.
So let me ask as well, do we go ahead, you know, do you start with the end in mind and start with your backward design to problem solving and say, you know, 10-1 doesn't cut it, 25-3 isn't cutting it. We want to go with a fiber connection, something that's 100 or more. Is that where we focus around the efforts on speed? And then also, you know, you start with, you know, what is 5 years going to look like, or what is 3 years in the future going to look like with the landscape within our region, and we build programs and resources out to addressing that. So when we get to that point in time, we've reached that goal. Is that, you know, is there a misstep in shooting for the moon with really trying to figure out, you know, we need a connection, and we need a digital inclusion strategy that's going to be ready in that, you know, in that 3-year mark from now, not what we're seeing today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the speed more relates to maximizing the eligibility where it is needed, right? And one thing I should have mentioned is the maps I showed you are complete, you know, very overstated according to everyone who's involved in that process, right? The mapping shows eligibility where it does not exist, and therefore the eligibility for funding, whether it's state, federal funding, is minimized, right? And it's preventing those areas from being competitive in attracting investment. And so the speed, when you say 10-1 and you saw the map on the left, right, and then you go to 25-3 and you see the map on the right, really it's just lighting up areas that are in need. And so I would think of it that way, right? Where
Okay.
do we need service? And what we see happening across the state is, unless it's an area that is extremely difficult to serve or well suited for a wireless point to point service, like a really flat, wide open area, um, typically we're seeing fiber. We're seeing high speed investments. If you look at the Next Level Connections grant awards and what's anticipated in the upcoming Rural Digital Opportunity Fund auction next week through the FCC, is very high speed investments. They are incentivizing those. And so I would be, and Roberto, jump in here, but we're not seeing DSL deployments. We're not seeing these slow speed deployments. When investments are made, from my perspective right now, I mean, they are long-term investments. And I think you have a provider on the phone today. You have an example of what's happening there. So anyway, yeah, that's how I think about speeds.
No, I think that's great. And, it's easy to get bogged down on just the speed, and just having that point of service at the home. But what I like about the digital inclusion topic overall is that it takes one more step back, or maybe even multiple steps back, and you can look at it more holistically and say, all right, well, just because we get the internet connection to the home, that still doesn't solve all the other problems. So you still have to have affordability, that the people are going to be able to access it. And then you also have to start to develop and build that skill base with younger, middle-aged, and older folks, all residents, so that they really understand, how to utilize the internet to the best of their ability, to be able to, to telework, to work from home, because there is a gap in skills. And I'm sure we've all seen it in the workplace, where there are definitely employees that are not, they don't have the skill level to work remotely in the,
Right.
in the environment and be productive.
Right. And Ryan, let me take it a step further. That's on the individual side, but do your mom and pops, do they have an online presence? Right? Are they able to compete in the digital economy? Are your manufacturers laying out plans to adopt AI? That's another big one. Is your local county government engaging digitally with its citizens? There are multiple layers or facets of the digital inclusive. The individual and the home are critical. Obviously, it's the backbone, but there are other elements that, from an economic development perspective, you can also kind of keep an eye on as you work on the infrastructure front.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very big, especially in my role and in what I'm trying to do with our organization, is to take a team approach throughout the region, and to say, look, no one community has to carry this torch all on themselves. That how do we really work together? So can we stop the conversation or switch it over a little bit to how do we start to form really good public-private partnerships, from local governments to help private businesses to overcome a lot of these digitally inclusion challenges? And how do we see, what do you guys see in the most successful communities, either in the state of Indiana or even nationally? Who's doing it well, and what kind of model should we strive to set up here between that public-private partnership for
Yeah.
development?
Yeah, it is amazing what's happening across the state right now in the partnership realm. We are seeing regions, counties, cities, towns partner in ways we've never seen them partner before with, providers of every type. We just saw an announcement earlier this week. I think it was Mercury Wireless partnering with Whitley County to do some tower builds. We know there are RFPs out across the state. I believe the city of Warsaw has a project planned for a tower build. Vanderburg has an RFP out for services to be provided to an area, requesting partners to come forth. REMCs, of course, are doing a lot of deployment as well, and are partnering very creatively with providers. Other providers, so internet service providers, are partnering with REMCs, and they're joining their technology, their resources in ways that are mutually beneficial, create efficiencies, and creating a kind of a myriad of different revenue models from, I've seen everything from, to a provider and RMC partnering and allowing the customer to select which one provides the internet service and the revenue flows that way, to, an RMC being completely hands off, but saying you can use all of our poles for free and your make ready costs will be, somehow lessened, to RMCs going it alone in some cases. And so, there's really, from what I've seen, this is a number one, very challenging to partner with a provider or in a community, right? That is, particularly when two providers partner, that's extremely challenging, but it's happening, right? And we're seeing success there. Down south, Perry Spencer Communications partnered with an REMC there, and the community chipped in funding to do a build out. They were one of the largest round one recipients of the state grant. So just a myriad of opportunities there, and willingness to do this, and capability and resources like we've never seen before. And so again, can't stress enough the timeliness of this conversation and your community's engagement on this issue.
No, that's great. Thank you. I want to jump back a little bit. We have a couple questions in the chat that I want to make sure that we address and we don't move on past them. The first one that I see right here is from Kristen Clary from Putnam County. She asks, you keep referring to grants available. Are these grants available to communities or only to providers? How do we go about applying?
Sure. So, I mean, essentially essentially anyone can apply, but you have to meet certain, criteria. You have to be able to provide the service, right? You have to have some financial and technical capability, obviously, right? And so generally that's open to anybody, municipalities, counties, REMCs, this is, and so if you have that capability and there's some things you have to do, right? Those doors are open. But generally what we see is providers applying, and that's for the federal and state. And that includes RMCs and the wireless folks and everyone, cable industry. And so where we see traction from a community perspective is in a partnership with those entities. And I will tell you, this Rural Digital Opportunity Fund auction prevents conversations after July. They said, as of July, we want those conversations to end because of antitrust kind of issues and competitiveness issues. And so as you look forward, those kind of conversations need to happen far in advance over a period of time, and building those relationships now through your leadership group with those providers of all types. I mean, you want to turn over every stone, right? I mean, there is no provider that I would not encourage you to talk to, all technology types. Looking at, gauging, and I like to say, three questions you need to ask are, of the providers, where are you currently in our community? Where would you like to expand to? And the most important question, how can we help you do that? And one of the responses you'll get is, we need help bringing the low income population into this digital world, right? That's one of the things I heard at the very end, and it was a painful thing to hear that late. But we were able to actually, if I could, just a quick example, in one meeting, we were able to sit down with the community foundation, the school corporation, the provider, and our group to say, how do we fix that? And very quickly, the foundation said, well, we could write a $50,000 check. The school said, we can select the students and handle the application process. And the provider said, we can administer this similar to our LIHEAP program that provides energy assistance to our customers. We have an administrative function that does that. And so literally in one meeting, 24 hours later, we had a solution on the table. And that's where, back to Roberto's point, if those people aren't talking and the groups that I just mentioned weren't at the table together and bought into what was happening, that conversation wouldn't have occurred. And a lot of, and right, it's a domino effect. So anyway, long response to say anyone can apply, but typically it's providers.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you. Looks like we got a lot of activity going on in the chat. Roberto's been replying to folks. To Pat Goodwin asked the question, just how do we communicate this better to the general public so they have a better grasp. I know that that's something that my organization is going to be very focused on here in the upcoming year. I am pleased to announce on this webinar, this is the first time I'm sharing this publicly, but our institution had partnered with PCRD, and we are going to be taking on what you call a digital inclusion fellow, which is a skilled partner through PCRD and AmeriCorps for the next year or maybe more, where they're going to be focused in really helping to provide this education, working with small businesses, working with our local leaders, working with our local government, to really help further this kind of conversation and to move things along. So I think that person will definitely be a huge asset to leverage all of the wonderful resources through Roberto and his group at PCRD, as well as Scott and their resources at the state, to be able to help with this kind of education piece in there, to get it out to the general public, as well as all of our community stakeholders. Roberto, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, thank you, Ryan, for breaking the news on that, or sharing the news. We are very excited. We learned fairly a couple days ago that we got that grant, and that's the idea, is to place these digital fellows in regions that will do multiple stuff, but around, perhaps the most important one is to what Pat was alluding to in the chat box, is to increase awareness of this issue, and also kind of beat the drum constantly on either delivering digital literacy workshops or engaged in the planning for the digital inclusion plan for the county or for the region. We're very excited about these fellows are going to be receive training of Community Economic Development 101, Digital Inclusion 101. So they're going to come prepped to help your region in whatever form or fashion it's needed to kind of get this message, to be heard by multiple stakeholders. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, I'm more than excited, to say the least. So I'm really looking forward to these pieces starting to come together here. And it looks like we're taking a step in the right direction. We had Heather who had asked a question, if I can find it here. I think it got pushed into my chat a little bit more, but she was asking about what are some models beyond that first step? And Roberto, you might want to speak to that a little bit, about some of the resources that PCRD provides. And I know I can speak. This digital fellow would be more than happy to probably connect with all of our communities to help them along that path.
Yeah, so Heather, and then I'll go into more details with Heather, but we do offer planning technical assistance, and like I said, regional digital inclusion planning that can be easily incorporated into your SEDS, your comprehensive economic development strategy, or your strategic plan for your community. We'll be more than happy to assist with that. We have a remote work certification for workers or individuals if they want to earn or learn basic remote working skills. We have a ton of resources. You can go to our website that just was updated, where we have what we're calling our ecosystem of digital inclusion resources and programs. I think we're excited about the times in the sense that the awareness is increasing. And so we have the resources here to help you, but I don't want to put anybody to sleep with all the details, but you can go to the website or reach out to me via email. I'll be happy to discuss further.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have one more question, and then I think we'll probably head towards wrapping this up so we can stay respectful of everybody's lunch hour. This is from Dylan Riggin up in Vermilion County. Should there be a two-pronged approach when tackling this at the county level? Business and residents have different needs. Are there more cost-effective methods to provide broadband to the residents in his area versus, since they're so very rural, instead of fiber, should there be another alternative?
Yeah, go ahead. Roberto, you want to respond to that?
Yeah. So Dylan, yeah, it's going to require multiple technologies, really. I know that fiber could be very expensive. At the end of the day, is that network capacity that you've got to really plan for. And so the providers will know this, the engineers will know this. Fiber is not the only solution, and it should not be considered the only thing. And so as long as you have all the pieces in place where you can perhaps push the fiber as deep as you can, and then, like Scott said, if you have line of sight, if there's not a lot of trees and other things, you can do a wireless last mile connection. So there are multiple ways. There's really not a best model or kind of a poster child of a model, because it's going to vary tremendously by topography, community resources. There's a lot of factors in there that's why you need this group to start thinking about this alongside with providers and knowledgeable and brilliant people like Mr. Scott.
Yeah, I agree with Roberto on his comments, about this kind of a multifaceted approach. Wanted to mention one thing because Dylan mentioned businesses and residents having different needs. Businesses have a whole new set of needs, and that includes kind of the health industry, the financial sector, and even just, every business. And so those needs relate to this conversation and what you're trying to accomplish here, which is connectivity and digital inclusiveness. And so for the first time, I think there's a better chance than ever to engage those individual businesses in contributing to your success. And as Ryan mentioned before, they need their employees to be able to not only just be connected at home, but to be able to function in their position from home. And that's a digital literacy piece and maybe some other things. And so think about very creatively how you engage businesses at this point in this juncture, maybe in a new way. And I had a chance to tour the hospital system out there, meet the CEO in Terre Haute, and I think it was Parkview. I could be wrong, but it sounded to me like a very progressive kind of opportunity to, he was very interested in telemedicine, obviously, and the impact on his bottom line. This was pre-COVID. He was very interested in telemedicine there for the health system and the success of that, particularly south of Terre Haute. I think you recall him saying, connecting with patients in that area is difficult with telemedicine. So anyway, you've got these potential partners that are stronger potentially than ever, and I just encourage you to take a new avenue there, right? That's a whole new prong that we were not, pre-COVID, maybe wasn't as open of a door as it is today. So don't be afraid to go down paths that people have not gone down. I mean, I can tell you, we were the first to do many of these things in our prior community, not by choice, just because we felt like we had to try it. And you'll find success there where you find, you may think you won't. And so encourage you to really be bold and go out in those new territories.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. So we're almost at time. I just want to say thank you very much, Scott and Roberto, for taking time out of your day. And I'd like to thank everybody else who jumped on the call. The follow-up outside of this webinar, you'll receive an email. We'll provide this recording for you to access if you want to go back and watch it and pull out something and you have some more questions. Feel free to send them over to me. I'm assuming that Scott and Roberto would be most likely, happy to answer questions outside of this webinar as well. And I'll easily make those connections for anyone and everyone. Coming out of
I shall say, Ryan, please go to Scott first. He's awesome. He likes to travel. Sorry, that's an internal joke we use. We tease each other bouncing the ball. So
yeah,
no,
thanks,
really,
Thank you.
you're welcome. No, really, we're here to help. Just shoot us an email, and we'll be happy to continue this conversation, Ryan. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what I would like to, I'd like to say that this is the catalyst for moving this conversation forward now and really starting to kind of, take that holistic approach within the region, but then also within each specific community or county, so to speak, to form a task force, if you haven't done so already, that starts to look and really put some structure around these problems. And starting to develop a little bit of a strategic plan or an action plan to say, how are we going to to address these issues in the years to come, so that in 3, 5, 7 years, we have really created a digitally inclusive region, and it's helping us thrive, both in a community and an economic way for all of our citizens. So that's the ultimate follow-up here after this meeting is over. So look for some more information from us. And with that, we are at 1 p.m. And as promised, this is a 1-hour webinar and a power lunch, and our time is done.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I hope you have a great day.